Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we're unpacking a really provocative policy framework. It's basically a blueprint for national economic stability, and it totally challenges some of the biggest assumptions we have about how a modern economy should actually run. Let's just dive right into it.
So to kick things off, take a look at this question. Are traditional corporate CEOs actually indispensable to a functioning economic system? It sounds a bit controversial, right? But the text we're looking at today makes a super radical claim about executive leadership, wealth distribution, and what actually makes a society successful. We're going to explore exactly why the author believes the answer to this question is a hard no.
Here's our agenda for today. We're covering systemic balance, the social floor, progressive taxation, public assets, and rethinking leadership.
All right, Section 1, Systemic Balance, Diagnosing the Economic Threat. The core premise here is that unchecked wealth disparity isn't just some abstract theoretical debate anymore. The text argues it's a structural roadblock that actively threatens a state's survival.
And it anchors this threat using a specific metric you might have heard of, the Gini coefficient. Basically, it's a measure of inequality. The author warns that if we just let this coefficient expand unchecked, we risk completely eroding the social contract you need for a functioning economy. And that matters to all of us, because if the gap between the richest and poorest gets too huge, the very foundation of societal cooperation just starts to crumble.
Which brings us to the ultimate danger pointed out in the text: regulatory capture. That happens when extreme wealth concentration lets private interests completely subvert natural market dynamics. According to the doctrine, when this goes down, the democratic and economic functions of the state end up being heavily compromised by concentrated private power.
Moving on to Section 2, the social floor, Pillar 1. To fight back against that systemic threat, the framework rolls out its first structural foundation. It advocates for incredibly robust safety nets, especially focusing on healthcare and unemployment protections for the most vulnerable.
Now, what's genuinely fascinating is how the author reframes these safety nets. Instead of looking at social support as a drain on the public treasury, the strategy treats these transfers as vital macroprudential tools. By prioritizing the economic base, the state essentially prevents a trap where poverty kills human capital. So we're not just talking about welfare here. We're talking about mitigating systemic risk and building a foundational resilience that actually stabilizes the domestic market against major cyclical shocks.
To really explain the philosophy behind this, the author uses a powerful metaphor, comparing society to a family. Think about it. Just like parents step up to support their kids no matter what, the text argues that society's wealthier and older folks have a moral responsibility to support the vulnerable collective. It frames this support as an inherent, built-in obligation for those who have the highest capacity to help.
Section 3, Progressive Taxation, Pillar 2. Naturally, a strong foundation needs funding, right? So the load-bearing walls of our whole architectural metaphor rely heavily on progressive taxation to keep economic disparity in check.
The text maps out this precise fiscal burden distribution model. Just look at how the high-income tier is mandated to chip in a higher proportion, using things like wealth surtaxes on non-productive assets. The big strategic objective here? Gini suppression. The whole goal is to make sure capital keeps circulating instead of just sitting stagnant in private hoards. Because as the text explicitly points out, stagnation literally triggers a market failure of liquidity.
Interestingly enough, the source also brings up a very pragmatic, real-world argument for this taxation that goes beyond pure economics, and it ties directly into everyday safety. It notes that an extreme wealth gap fosters criminal behavior right across the spectrum. The author basically asserts that even if the wealthy feel like the quote-unquote winners in a super unequal system, the social instability that follows eventually makes them losers too, even if they don't see it right away.
Next up, Section 4, Public Assets, Pillar 3. Moving right up our structure, the protective roof of our architectural metaphor is the public interest doctrine. This is entirely focused on safeguarding essential societal services. And the text doesn't mince words here. It explicitly states that what is important to everyone must not be privatized. The framework argues that absolutely essential societal functions need total insulation from the extractive nature of short-term profit motives. Privatizing these sectors, according to the source, is actually a massive risk to our collective national stability.
But the author makes a super crucial and nuanced distinction, especially right there in Step 3, market dynamic integration. They argue that market forces, like efficiency and competition, exist totally independently of private ownership. Think about your local water supply or the power grid. The state can, and absolutely must, use market dynamics internally to drive efficiency, but without dropping the ball on ensuring universal access. In this view, a state is often way better positioned to manage infrastructure because success is measured by service reliability for you and me, not by shareholder dividends.
Section 5. Rethinking Leadership, Governance Reform. This is the operating manual of the blueprint. For this whole new structure to actually work, the framework demands a radical shift away from what it calls the cult of the individual in both corporate and public leadership.
Check out this stark contrast. This is where things get really unconventional. The author argues that leaning on a single, highly paid, quote-unquote experienced executive often just leads to status quo bias and institutional inertia. Instead, they propose a team model. 3 recent graduates paired up with 3 experienced advisors. The text argues this kind of collective intelligence is vastly cheaper, way less prone to industry capture, and actually produces superior, data-driven outcomes by balancing fresh, innovative theory with practical guidance. And all of this culminates in what the text boldly calls the CEO replaceability thesis. The source literally asserts that every CEO is effortlessly replaceable and probably overpaid. It's a direct, head-on challenge to modern corporate myth-making. The core argument is that systemic outcomes and success are driven by organizational structure and collective intelligence, not by some supposedly indispensable superstar individual.
Finally, rethinking leadership, synthesizing the equitable state. So, with all these different elements out on the table, how do they actually interlock? Let's bring it all together.
The strategy argues that these pillars aren't just independent silos, they're deeply mutually reinforcing. It's like a giant puzzle. Progressive taxes bring in the revenue that funds the social safety net, which then turns around and stabilizes the market. At the same time, collective governance models are managing those protected public assets strictly for the societal good, totally free from the demands of exorbitant executive compensation.
The overarching takeaway of this entire blueprint is crystal clear. National prosperity is 100% a collective achievement. Prioritizing systemic equilibrium and balance over individual wealth accumulation isn't just presented as a nice option, it's laid out as literally the only viable path to long-term prosperity and state survival. Which leaves us with this final, genuinely provocative thought to ponder. If the framework we explored today is correct, and national prosperity is truly a collective achievement born of structure rather than individual superstars, is our current obsession with individual wealth creation structurally obsolete? It's a wildly fascinating question about the underlying architecture of our own society and economy. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep questioning the structures around you.